Welcome back to Forecasting with Friends, everybody. I'm Mike Iskovitz here in the Weather Center talking about the winter outlook. Now, you may have heard us mention yesterday, didn't get talked about much because of the heavy rain that we had around here on Monday, but yesterday was the first day of what we call meteorological winter. So what's the deal with that? Why is it meteorological winter versus just winter? Well, there's two ways to sort of define winter. One is by the calendar, like December 1st, and another is by an astronomical event. So most of the time we talk about the first day of winter being the astronomical winter. So that is the shortest day of the year, shortest amount of daylight, typically in the northern hemisphere. And it also is the day that the sun is as far south as it's going to get. So the first day of winter for us, the first day of summer in the southern hemisphere, is that moment that the sun touches 23.5 degrees south latitude. So when that happens, you've got the Arctic Circle, like in northern parts of Alaska. They don't see any sunshine at all. It's just dark all day. And then in the far southern part of the atmosphere, the sun is out all day. So that's the astronomical first day of winter. And that's usually December 21st or December 22nd. And it's a very specific time that we call the winter solstice. The meteorological, or you could call it calendar winter, begins on December 1st, and it goes through the end of February. Why do we pick those months? Well, because those are the three coldest months of the year, typically, almost always. So you've got December, January, February, that's meteorological winter. The astronomical winter would go from like December 21st or 22nd to March 21st or 22nd, and it changes from year to year. So I hope that kind of makes sense to you. So let's talk about the outlook for meteorological winter. So we'll look at the outlook across the country, but also the outlook right here in Houston, obviously, which is what we want you to know. So turning to the graphics here, I have set up here the typical trends that we see as far as temperatures are concerned. Now, why do I say typical trends? Because every La Niña is a little different. Sometimes you have a strong La Niña, which, by the way, what is La Niña? Well, the El Niño La Niña is this back and forth oscillation of pressure and wind, and therefore water temperatures in the Pacific Ocean. And all you need to know is that it affects the jet stream flow across the United States, even though it's way down there in the Pacific, in the equator. During La Niña winters, which is where the water is cold off the coast of South America, you end up with this, which is where we typically have the jet stream shifted a little farther to the north and warmer than normal conditions, usually across an area from New Mexico and Texas, back across the Gulf Coast, Louisiana, back over to Florida, and then over to the Carolinas. That's usually what we see. Keep in mind this is on average. Okay? It doesn't mean that you're not going to have some Arctic blast that comes down for 3 or 4 days and it's extremely cold. That could absolutely happen. And you think back to like the big freeze of 2021, the Valentine's Day or the President's Day winter storm. That happened within the context of the rest of the winter that was relatively mild. But then you have this huge record-setting plunge. That could happen. But when we look at this is just the overall trend. It's for warmer than average conditions from Texas to Florida, and some colder or cooler than normal conditions across the far northern parts of the upper plains and the northern parts of the Rocky Mountains, and also some wetter than normal conditions across that part of the country as well. So that's a look at temperature trends. When we look specifically at precipitation outlook, this is what we're looking at for precipitation. For similar areas here, we're looking for drier than normal conditions. And so that includes most of Texas, especially West Texas and down in the Rio Grande Valley. On average, you have drier than normal conditions. And again, this doesn't mean that it's never going to rain. It just means that if you were to make a prediction right now, based on the fact that there's a La Niña, we're probably going to have less rain than in an ordinary winter. we've already had heavy rain on the first day of December, right? Yesterday. And we probably will have more rain coming up on the 4th of December, the 5th of December, and we'll see what happens beyond that. But this is on average what happens, is that you'll have drier than average conditions here across Texas, across New Mexico and Arizona, and across Florida. This is the official outlook from the National Weather Service. This is called the Climate Prediction Center outlook. So this is their outlook for December, January, February. And notice they are showing wetter than average conditions, which does include snow. Remember, this isn't just rain. This can also be snow. That's a type of precipitation, of course. So they're showing wetter than normal conditions here for cities like Milwaukee, Chicago, Minneapolis, Detroit, and Buffalo, and also wetter than average conditions across the northwestern part of the USA, like Oregon and Washington, and back over to the Rocky Mountains. Drier than average conditions are expected for cities like Phoenix and El Paso, Corpus Christi and Austin, as well as over to Florida, Tampa, Orlando, and Jacksonville, all expected to see, on average, drier conditions. Beyond that, we could also look at the temperature. Now, remember we talked about how typically you see warmer than average conditions. This, again, is the official outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, from the National Weather Service. And they are kind of going along with that trend of showing warmer than average conditions across the entire state of Texas, if you open things up, except for a little sliver of the Panhandle, but that does include Houston and Austin, San Antonio, Corpus, the Rio Grande Valley, the Big Bend region, West Texas. All of these spots are expected to be above average when you take that whole 3-month period. Now, within that, we could have a cold snap and go down to the 20s. We can't say that that's impossible, but when you average everything out, most likely this is what is going to happen. Also, warmer than average conditions out to the west, like around Phoenix and Tucson, warmer than average conditions in Miami, Tampa, Jacksonville, Atlanta, Raleigh-Durham, Charlotte, and those spots. And it may even turn out to be warmer than average for places like New York City and Washington, D.C. But again, this is usually this is a term I like to use, is punctuated by some more extreme weather events where you might be kind of mild for a while and then you get a big snowstorm or something like that. So when we just summarize the weather outlook here for Houston, milder than average overall. Occasional storms could still bring some heavy rain. And important to remember that brief cold blasts remain possible, so don't rule out isolated cold or freezing events within that context of a warmer than average winter. So that's what we expect, and it's something that I think we've gotten used to around here over the last several years, is that sometimes we've had Christmas days that hit 85 degrees, right? I mean, that's happened in recent memory. And we've gone through times where it's been kind of mild and not a whole lot going on. And then all of a sudden you go through just 3 or 4 days of an extreme cold snap or flooding rains, and then everything kind of gets back to normal. So that's the outlook for this meteorological winter season for December, January, February. So now you can explain to people the difference between the meteorological winter and the astronomical winter. And now hopefully you know a little bit more of what to expect for this winter.